The jig is up. Slap on sight. Two grown men, one worth hundreds of millions, the other running the biggest fast food wing empire in hip-hop history. And in the summer of 2026, both of them are behaving like two teenagers in a lunchroom staring each other down over a spilled tray. Except the tray is a Billboard chart. And the lunchroom is the entire internet. And the beef is old enough to sit for a driver's permit. Stay right where you are, because tonight the story is not the diss, it is not the album, it is not even the sales number that everybody has been shouting about for 3 straight weeks. Tonight the story is a single frozen second in time back in 2008 that nobody wants to talk about anymore. One look. One smirk. One petty little moment at a BET event that neither Rick Ross nor 50 Cent will ever admit was the real reason we are all here in August 2026 watching Rick Ross promise, on camera, that if 50 Cent walks past Rick Ross in a hotel lobby, an airport, a barbershop, or a Wingstop, Rick Ross is going to slap 50 Cent across the face. On sight. Rick Ross said it. Not implied. Not subliminal. Not a rap lyric hidden inside a verse 3 minutes into a song nobody streamed. Rick Ross looked into a camera lens on August 6, 2026, with the calm voice of a man who has been holding a grudge inside a diamond-studded chest for the better part of 2 decades, and Rick Ross said the words that lit hip-hop on fire again. Slap. On. Sight. 3 syllables. 1 promise. 18 years of pressure, released in a single breath. And here is what nobody is telling you. Everybody online right now is arguing about numbers. 19,000 units. 26,000 units. 42,000 equivalents. 2,000 copies in a day. Number 39 on the Billboard 200. Everybody is playing accountant. Everybody is playing analyst. Everybody is playing chart historian. But nobody, and Rick Ross means nobody in a single one of those loud podcast panels, is going back to the actual origin point of this whole thing. So Rick Ross is going to take you there. Because you cannot understand August 2026 until you understand a hallway backstage in 2008, and a single glance that Rick Ross swears in every interview never even happened, and that 50 Cent swears was the funniest accident in hip-hop history. Let Rick Ross set the table. On July 17, 2026, Rick Ross released the 12th studio album of Rick Ross's career. It is called Set in Stone. It came out through Gamma and Rick Ross's own Maybach music group. 19 tracks. A guest list stacked with T.I., Jeezy, French Montana, Gucci Mane, Don Toliver, and Kodak Black. 20 years into a career that has survived federal photographs, seizure warrants, a heart condition that would have retired lesser men, and a rival who has spent the entire time trying to bury Rick Ross under the internet. On paper, Set in Stone was the victory lap. On paper, Rick Ross had already won just by being here. The album was the trophy. The trophy was already engraved. Rick Ross even titled it Set in Stone, because Rick Ross wanted the world to know that Rick Ross cannot be erased. Rick Ross wanted the title itself to be a wall, a monument, a closing statement carved into granite for anyone in 2026 who still had the nerve to whisper the word washed anywhere near the name Rick Ross. Then the leaks came. And the leaks were merciless. Early projections whispered under 26,000 units for the first week. Then somebody, somewhere, in one of those anonymous accounts that lives to detonate careers, dropped the ugliest number of them all. 2,000 copies in pure first-day sales. 2,000. Not 20,000. Not 200,000. 2,000. The kind of number that a bedroom rapper posts on his second mixtape, not the kind of number that lives under the name of the man who once sold 187,000 copies of Port of Miami in a single week back in 2006. Think about the gap for a second. From 187,000 in 7 days to a rumor of 2,000 in 24 hours, inside the same career, under the same name, on the same chest. That is not a dip. That is a canyon. And 50 Cent, of all the people alive on this planet, was the last man on earth Rick Ross wanted standing at the edge of that canyon holding a bullhorn. The number leaked at, roughly, the exact minute 50 Cent was refreshing his Instagram feed. Because in this universe, the number always leaks at exactly that minute. 50 Cent lives for that minute. 50 Cent waits on that minute the way a fisherman waits on a bite. And when the 2000 hit the timeline, Curtis Jackson pulled out his phone and typed, in the calmest tone a man has ever typed anything, a line that is now stitched into the timeline forever. I just saw your record sales. LOL. 2000. What the actual is happening? And Curtis Jackson let it sit. Curtis Jackson did not follow up. Curtis Jackson did not caption. Curtis Jackson just left the phrase floating there for the world to feast on. And the world did what the world always does when Curtis Jackson leaves food out. The world ate. Then Curtis Jackson posted again. 20 features under 10,000 sales, damn boy, it's over. Then Curtis Jackson posted again. A photograph of Curtis Jackson eating popcorn, captioned with a line that Rick Ross will remember on Rick Ross's deathbed. So when your tickets don't sell, and your album don't sell, what do? Promote car shows, and sell chicken wings. LOL. That chicken wing line hit different. That chicken wing line was not aimed at Rick Ross the rapper. That chicken wing line was aimed at Rick Ross the businessman, at the Wingstop empire that Rick Ross has spent more than a decade telling the world is the real crown, at the entire mythology of the boss, who eats better than anyone in the room. Curtis Jackson did not just come for Rick Ross's music. Curtis Jackson came for Rick Ross's dinner. And in this genre, coming for a man's dinner is louder than coming for a man's discography. By August 4, 2026, the official numbers were finally locked. 19,000 equivalent album units. Number 39 on the Billboard 200. The worst debut of Rick Ross's 12-album career. For comparison, Richer Than I Ever Been opened at 34,000. Port of Miami opened at 187,000. Rick Ross has been, statistically, a 19,000-unit artist for exactly 1 week in 20 years, and 50 Cent was determined that the entire planet was going to remember that week for the rest of Rick Ross's life. And so Curtis Jackson posted the eulogy. LOL, I'm sorry, it's over, can't fake it forever. Then Rick Ross posted a poolside clip clapping back. Curtis Jackson reposted it and captioned it, LOL, Rick Ross got away with it for a while, but it's over now. The jig is up. The jig is up. 4 words. Rick Ross will hear those 4 words in Rick Ross's sleep. Tony Yeo joined in. G-Unit soldiers joined in. Comment sections were carnage. Meme pages had a field day. Podcasters lined up for the autopsy. Every barbershop in America suddenly had an opinion. Every hip-hop show suddenly had a segment. Every rap Twitter account with more than 1,000 followers suddenly had a hot take ready to fire. And for about 72 hours, the internet had already written the obituary. The self-proclaimed biggest boss in hip-hop had, according to the internet, been reduced to a 19,000-unit man dancing next to a swimming pool while 50 Cent posted popcorn emojis, like a stadium announcer calling the final score. And then, Rick Ross did the one thing nobody expected. Rick Ross did not shrink. Rick Ross did not apologize. Rick Ross did not go quiet. Rick Ross doubled the boss. Rick Ross went at the numbers first. Real hip-hop lovers, Rick Ross said, should never get caught up in the propaganda and the fake bot numbers. Go to the product. Test the product. Ask yourself how amazing the music actually is. Rick Ross pushed the counter figure. 63.5 million streams in the first 2 weeks, roughly 42,500 album equivalent units, more than twice what the news headlines were screaming. Rick Ross reframed the definition of winning itself. "I'm already paid before the album come out," Rick Ross said. "The drastic fall-offs you see on other artists," Rick Ross argued, happened because their numbers were inflated by bots to begin with. "The new flex," Rick Ross said, "is not bots. The new flex is the long game." And Rick Ross has been playing the long game for 20 years. Then, because subtlety has never been on the Rick Ross menu, Rick Ross went at 50 Cent's business. The Shreveport, Louisiana move. The G-Unit film and television studio play. The heavy local investment. "How's it going in Shreveport?" Rick Ross asked, dripping with sarcasm. "You borrowed all them people money. Did you give the money back? Give the people back their money, Curtis." Rick Ross did not stop. Rick Ross dragged the fallen G-Unit empire into the flames. "Those G-Unit sneakers gonna be at Costco, baby. Give Lloyd Banks his own high-top sneaker. Since the Shreveport stuff ain't happening no more, you can focus on the sneakers." Rick Ross declared Set in Stone the album of the year, at number 39. And then, 5 days later, Rick Ross said the words that changed the temperature of the entire feud. Slap on sight. Now, here is where every other channel stops. Every other channel plays those 3 words in a loop, wraps a graphic around it, runs the sales numbers under it, and calls it a video. Rick Ross is not doing that. Rick Ross is taking you somewhere none of those channels are willing to go. Rick Ross is going back to the exact frozen second in 2008 that this entire war was built on, because until you understand that second, none of the rest of this makes any sense. Rewind. Late 2000s. A BT event. Backstage. According to Tony Yeo, according to multiple people who were around at the time, Rick Ross felt that 50 Cent gave Rick Ross a funny look. A smirk. A snub. Depending on who you ask, 50 Cent did not acknowledge Rick Ross at all. That was it. That was the entire spark. No song stolen. No verse rejected. No feature refused. No money owed. A look. A single, half-second glance in a hallway that neither man will ever describe the same way twice. Rick Ross took the look personally. And by January 2009, Rick Ross had turned that look into a disc called Mafia Music that aimed straight at 50 Cent's personal life, at the mother of 50 Cent's son, at a very public and very ugly child support fight, at a house that had, in real life, mysteriously burned down after a court ruling went in 50 Cent's favor. That was the spark that 50 Cent had been waiting on for the entire career of 50 Cent. Because 50 Cent, as anyone who has watched 50 Cent operate for 25 years already knows, does not respond to dices. 50 Cent responds to opportunities. And Rick Ross had just handed 50 Cent an opportunity gift-wrapped in violation. 50 Cent fired back with "Try Me" on Teases50.com. And with "Try Me" came the nickname that would haunt Rick Ross forever. Officer Ricky. Because before Rick Ross was a rapper, Rick Ross, born William Roberts, had worked briefly as a correctional officer in Florida. In a genre built on street credibility, that revelation was a nuclear payload, and 50 Cent detonated it every single day. Every interview. Every skit. Every Instagram caption. Every merchandise drop. For a solid year, you could not open a hip-hop blog without seeing the words Officer Ricky in a headline somewhere. It was, without exaggeration, the most sustained public humiliation campaign one rapper has ever waged against another, and it worked because it was true. Every photograph that surfaced from that correctional facility was another crack in the boss costume Rick Ross had been sewing since Port of Miami. 50 Cent recorded a video, sitting in front of a camera, calm as a surgeon, and delivered a sentence that in hindsight reads like a prophecy carved into the future. Nobody controls Curtis Jackson. Curtis Jackson does what Curtis Jackson wants to do. Rick Ross, Curtis Jackson is going to mess Rick Ross's life up. For fun. For fun. Those two words are the entire operating system of this beef. Because for 50 Cent, humiliating Rick Ross has never been business. It has never been personal in the way regular beefs are personal. It has always been a hobby. A pastime. A game 50 Cent invented and refuses to let end. A form of recreation for a man who has already made every dollar Curtis Jackson will ever need and has decided that the leftover time will be spent forever in the group chat, on the Instagram feed, in the podcast studio, chipping away at the mythology of Rick Ross the Boss. What followed in 2009 was one of the most ruthless trolling campaigns hip-hop has ever seen. 50 Cent conducted interviews with Rick Ross's ex. 50 Cent aired out Rick Ross's private life in cartoon spoofs, in comedy skits, in pimp and curly videos, in an endless stream of digital content that landed every single week. 50 Cent literally took Rick Ross's baby mother shopping. On camera. With a bodyguard. With a smile. Every shot 50 Cent fired was engineered to strip Rick Ross of the mythology Rick Ross had constructed. The mansions. The Maybachs. The boss persona. The gospel of the biggest boss you have seen thus far. 50 Cent was not trying to win a rap battle. 50 Cent was trying to disassemble a costume. Rick Ross kept swinging. Rick Ross gave 50 Cent a fake 48-hour deadline to produce a better diss. Rick Ross released Kiss My Pinky Ring. Rick Ross filmed the video for In Cold Blood inside an actual funeral parlor, complete with a staged memorial for the death of Curtis Jackson. And here is the twist that nobody in 2009 saw coming, and that everybody in 2026 has forgotten about entirely. The beef was supposed to end Rick Ross. Instead, the beef built Rick Ross into a monument. When Deeper Than Rap dropped in April 2009, the album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. Around 150,000 copies in the first week. Industry sales data from that period showed that the beef was actually boosting both catalogs, with Rick Ross's back catalog jumping 62% and 50 Cent's catalog jumping 74%. The war was, in accounting terms, the greatest free marketing campaign either man ever ran. Neither one of them had to spend a dollar. They were paying each other in attention, and the attention was minting money on both sides of the ledger. But the war never actually ended. The war just changed clothes. In 2011, the collateral damage became tragically real when an associate of Rick Ross was killed. A grim reminder that rap beef can bleed into physical life whether the principals wanted to or not. The 2010s came, and the shots kept coming. Lawsuits. Social media jabs. Rick Ross declaring 50 Cent finished. 50 Cent mocking every commercial stumble Rick Ross ever tripped on. When Rick Ross's numbers dipped, 50 Cent was there. When 50 Cent's television empire grew, Rick Ross was there calling it smoke and mirrors. Streaming replaced downloads. TikTok replaced radio. Whole generations of rappers were born, blew up, and were forgotten inside the lifespan of this beef. And through every single era, somewhere in the world, 50 Cent was clowning Rick Ross, and Rick Ross was promising that when the two of them finally crossed paths, the promise would be collected in person. Which brings the story straight back to August 2026. And the uncomfortable question everybody is dancing around. Who is actually winning? Because 50 Cent's case has never been stronger. 19,000 units is 19,000 units. Number 39 on the Billboard 200 is a fact, not a rumor. This is the same Rick Ross, who declared Drake washed after Iceman, and then watched Drake spend 4 straight weeks at #1, while Rick Ross himself posted the worst debut of Rick Ross's 20-year career. Hot 97's Kid Mero twisted the knife on air, pointing out that Rick Ross could have benefited from Drake's momentum instead of dismissing it. The irony of that is almost too perfect. Rick Ross spent years playing referee on who is still relevant, And the second Rick Ross blew the whistle on somebody else, the numbers turned on Rick Ross. But Rick Ross's counter is not empty either. 20 years in the game. An independent deal with Gamma, which means Rick Ross keeps a much bigger slice of a smaller pie than any label artist ever will. Wingstop. Car shows. Real estate. The brand is the business now, and the business, as Rick Ross has been saying for a decade, is what actually pays. If Rick Ross's streaming claim is even close to accurate, the 2,000 copies narrative that 50 Cent weaponized was never the whole picture. It was a snapshot of pure sales dressed up as a career diagnosis. And 50 Cent, more than anyone else on the planet, knows the difference between a snapshot and a season. Which is exactly why 50 Cent will never publicly admit that difference on camera. Because the moment 50 Cent admits it, the entire 2,000 joke stops working. So who is right? Maybe both. Maybe neither. And here is where Rick Ross has to say the sentence that nobody wants to hear. This war has not been about music since roughly 2011. This war is about identity. 50 Cent built the legend of Curtis Jackson on being the man who ends careers. Ask Ja Rule. Ask anyone who tried to stand across from 50 Cent in the mid-2000s. Admitting that Rick Ross survived 50 Cent means admitting that there is one man in the entire industry who Curtis Jackson could not finish. And Rick Ross built the legend of the biggest boss on being untouchable. The correctional officer photographs did not break Rick Ross. The diss tracks did not break Rick Ross. The baby mother shopping trips did not break Rick Ross. Admitting that 50 Cent's trolling actually hurts now would be admitting that the armor Rick Ross has been welding for 18 years has cracks. Neither man can walk away. Walking away is losing. And so, 18 years after a smirk that may or may not have happened at a BET event, a 50-year-old television mogul is posting popcorn emojis about album sales, and a 49-year-old rap boss is standing in front of a camera promising to slap 50 Cent on sight. Will Rick Ross actually do it? Realistically, no. In nearly 2 decades, Rick Ross and 50 Cent have never once thrown physical hands. Their teams famously scuffled at the BET Hip Hop Awards in 2012, but the two principals have kept the war strictly verbal, strictly digital, strictly psychological. The slap is almost certainly a promise that will never be collected in a hallway. But that is not the point. The point is that Rick Ross needed to say it. Because in the internal economy of this feud, saying it is the same as doing it. The threat is the product. The promise is the punchline. The image of Rick Ross's palm connecting with 50 Cent's face is the meme that Rick Ross planted in your brain. And every time somebody sees a photograph of 50 Cent from now on, that image will flicker for half a second underneath it. Rick Ross knows what Rick Ross is doing. And so does 50 Cent. Because the second Rick Ross said slap on sight, 50 Cent went to the lab. Somewhere in New York, or Shreveport, or a hotel suite that costs more per night than set in stone earned per hour, Curtis Jackson is already scripting the response. History says the response will land within 24 hours of any real spark. History says the response will be merciless. History says the response will not be a diss track. It will be a photograph, or a caption, or a 15-second Instagram clip that ends careers with the sound off. 50 Cent has been doing this since Ja Rule was still trying to figure out how to spell his own name in the credits. 50 Cent is not going to break the streak now. Here is the piece nobody is putting on top of the story. Everybody is treating this like a business feud. Rick Ross is not. Rick Ross is treating this like a family argument that never got resolved at the dinner table. Because that is what this is. 18 years of two men refusing to speak first, refusing to let it go, refusing to admit that the whole thing started with a look that maybe neither of them even remembers correctly. Rick Ross is Miami. 50 Cent is Queens. Rick Ross drives Maybachs. 50 Cent drives conversations. Rick Ross sells wings. 50 Cent sells vodka and television shows. On paper, the two of them should never have crossed paths long enough to hate each other. In practice, hip-hop is a small hallway, and two big men will always find each other in a small hallway, and one of them will always feel like the other one looked at him wrong. There is one more layer nobody is talking about, and Rick Ross is going to put it on the record right here. Watch what happens to Rick Ross's streaming numbers over the next 30 days. Watch what happens to Set and Stone's backend. Watch what happens to Wingstop's late-night traffic in Miami and Atlanta. Watch what happens to 50 Cent's next Instagram engagement chart the second the response drops. Because if the 2009 data is any indication, both of these men are about to see a spike that no marketing team on the planet could have paid for. That is the ugly secret of this feud that nobody in either camp will ever admit out loud. Every slap threat, every popcorn emoji, every leaked sales number, every jig is up caption is a receipt. And the receipts are being cashed in on both sides. The feud is the product. The feud has always been the product. And 2026 is not the ending. 2026 is a reissue with new packaging and a fresh coat of gasoline. So the sales question is the wrong question. Ask yourself the right one. What does it cost a 50-year-old man to keep coming back to Instagram, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, to post one more popcorn emoji at the same target? And what does it cost a 49-year-old man, 20 years into an empire, to stand in front of a camera and threaten to slap another grown man in the face over a chart position? The answer, in both directions, is the same. It costs them both nothing. Because both of them have already made the money. Both of them have already built the empires. Both of them have already outlived every peer who was supposed to have finished them by now. The only currency left between them, the only thing they can still spend on each other, is attention. And attention is the currency of 2026. So they are burning it on each other, on purpose, because neither one of them can imagine an internet in which the other one is not in it. Take 50 Cent out of Rick Ross's timeline, and Rick Ross has to invent a new villain. Take Rick Ross out of 50 Cent's timeline, and 50 Cent loses the one hobby that has kept 50 Cent's phone in 50 Cent's hand for 18 straight years. Neither man can afford that quiet. Rick Ross said set in stone. 50 Cent said the jig is up. Both of those sentences are trying to write the same headline. That headline is, "This ends with me on top." And here is the ugly, beautiful truth. Neither one of them gets to write that headline. Because the headline is being written by you. By the comments section. By the memes. By the retweets. By the next number that leaks. And the next popcorn emoji that lands. And the next interview where one of them promises something the other one will never let go of. This is not a fight to the finish. This is a rally. And it will only end when one of them stops swinging, which is to say, it will not end. Ever. So, real question. Look Rick Ross in the eye and tell Rick Ross what Rick Ross needs to hear. Is 50 Cent right? Is the jig actually up for Rick Ross? Or is Rick Ross right? And the definition of winning in 2026 is a 20-year brand, a bot-free stream count, and an independent deal that keeps the check inside the house. Drop the honest take in the comments. Do not soft pedal it. Do not moderate it. Rick Ross does not read moderated takes. Tell Rick Ross which side you are on. Tell Rick Ross whether Rick Ross should collect the slap or let it slide. And while you are down there, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. Because 50 Cent's response is coming. And when 50 Cent's response lands, this channel is going to be the first place that breaks it down bar for bar, post for post, receipt for receipt. Until the next round. And until 50 Cent inevitably posts a caption that makes Rick Ross reach for the phone at 2 in the morning, keep the volume up, keep the notifications loud at all times, and remember one big thing. The beef is not the story. The beef is the business. And business is very good. Rick Ross out.